What if you could know what's on the hacker's mind? Wouldn't that be great? Well, today we'll talk to a hacker, so we'll find out. My name is Lieuwe Jan Koning, and here from the Security Operations Center at Onto we bring you Threat Talks. And the subject of today is Inside the Hacker's Mind. Let's get on to it.
Welcome to Threat Talks. Let's delve deep into the dynamic world of cybersecurity.
Let me introduce our guest of today. His name is Tom van de Wiele. He is an ethical hacker in his own company. It's called Hacker Minded. You can hire him. And 50% of his time he spends breaking into systems, talking to CISOs, talking to organizations on what he found and how to prevent it. And the other 50% is him speaking to audiences, to do workshops and all that, to spread the word on how things should be. So I'm thrilled to have him here. Tom, welcome at the show. I have a question to you. I mean, you deliver a lot of reports to organizations, right? How do people respond to that?
Well, there's all kinds of responses. I'll give you the most outlandish one, which is I physically got a report thrown at my head. But it all kind of depends on what people's expectations were of what you're trying to test, because most people unfortunately come to security tests with a certain expectation that things are being done in an adequate way. And of course, you know, the test is usually the cold shower. And people have different reactions when it comes to that, usually very emotional.
Yeah, and well, a report thrown at you? I mean, you didn't get injured, right? Hopefully.
No, I mean, it was, kind of shoved in my face and thrown up, yes.
Oh, really?
The person was trying to make a point, yeah.
That was an interesting day, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh, we still talk about that day, yes.
Yeah, again today, yeah. All right, so you come across a lot. I mean, and maybe you can explain a little bit about your background. I mean, you've been doing everything from Linux sysadmin to cloud, and can you explain a little bit on all the things you did before, what areas did you? How do you become you? Can you explain that?
Well, I think long story short, I mean, it's a typical story in that I was a child that just had a burning desire to know how things work, taking your toys apart and never putting them back together again, or just being annoyed that a certain thing didn't work in the way that I wanted. So that kind of escalated to the point where I got my hands on the phone network, then computers, then the internet. So basically my passion turned to my job, where the control that I wanted over the thing that was on my desk, people looked over my shoulder and say, hey, can you come do that for me? So a hobby turned into a job, which turned into system administration, which turned into forensics, which turned into anti-forensics, penetration testing. So I come from the defense side, and I slowly, over the now 23 years, work my way to a point where I break into companies, and as you mentioned, I talk not only about why these things work, but also how these things work.
I bet it's very useful for you to know, like you have deep technical knowledge about that. Let's be clear about that, about all those subjects. You know how operating systems work, you know how the cloud is configured and all that. That helps you a lot, I guess.
I mean, I think it's almost, it is a prerequisite, at least where I'm coming from, is that the bits and bytes as far as, NetSec or network security, application security, cryptography, but also aspects of, physical security, architecture. Because as well as I do that, technology might come and go, but best practices and how we use the technology to, improve our way of life and business, those remain. So you need to be able to step back and look at the bigger picture, but you also need to be able to do deep dives into the deep technical stuff, so you understand when a new vulnerability arises or something else comes up, that you're able to place it. And of course, in my position, be able to advise companies on how to take the best next step that is in their interest.
Translate this, yeah. So what things do you find? Can you speak to stuff that nowadays are in your reports?
Well, I mean, again, it depends on what I am asked to do. So as said, I can tasked.
What's a good question of a customer to ask to you? What's a good question?
Well, a good question is one that takes into account where the company is in the world as far as geopolitical, the business sector, but also, what kind of products and services they have, where the actual revenue comes from, and then to see, okay, what are the scenarios that could really impede on our ability to be able to do business? What would dilute our brand? Or what are kind of the worst case scenarios that are relevant to that particular organization? And then you come up with testing scenarios. Some of these you can just, solve with a review, but others do need to be tested because there's only one way to assess whether or not the complete collection of all your controls are actually doing their job, which is to test. In the same way that you and I brush our teeth every day, but once in a while you do need to go to the dentist to make sure that you're doing the right thing.
And what pops up a lot of your findings?
What pops up, unfortunately, still is assets without an owner. That is to say, network devices, computers, networks, applications, and of course, now in the days of cloud, it also means cloud estate, where either things are forgotten, things are not added to a certain process or procedure, and then, of course, someone like me comes along, finds these things. There's usually something on there that I can use. And with that, I can usually jump over to something that the company cares about.
Do you mean it's a system that is not no longer used, but still there? Or just they forgot to put it into the lifecycle management, for example?
It could be both. I see both. It could be that someone was unfortunately laid off or an acquisition was done for, maybe they required a new service. Could be SaaS, could be something else. But then the old thing is still running and no one really decommissioned it. So putting up infrastructure is important, but being able to decommission and knowing what you have, can sometimes be more important when you're dealing with the internet, because obviously you cannot protect what you don't know about.
Yeah, it's like you have another room in your house that you didn't know needed a lock.
Exactly. And then you open the room and the floor is filled with muddy boot prints. And that's usually where I get the phone call. So, yeah.
Ah, nice. Yeah, you do get a phone call also when things have gone south, huh?
Well, sometimes, certain vulnerabilities are found. That could be because, companies, as part of their normal vulnerability management, will do scanning. They will hire some penetration testers. But then, sometimes the penetration testers find a security hole that's been there for quite a while. You don't have the luxury to just, wait for the report to be delivered. You need to know, okay, knowing that this was there for X amount of time, what are the different scenarios that someone could have used? And if so, what can we do to see if that needs to be part of our incident response plan? So it's knowing how these cyber attacks work, also what their limitations are, and of course, looking in your logs and setting up a detection strategy to see, okay, how bad was this? Were the penetration testers the first ones to find this? Or did we already have someone that found this before them? And of course, to act accordingly.
Do you think that, in generally speaking, organizations are looking closely enough to stuff that's happening?
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately, a lot of companies, and again, these are business decisions. So unfortunately, a lot of companies will go for compliance, which is already hard enough if you're a mid-market or a smaller company. So again, don't get me wrong, I'm sympathetic to the cause here, to the problem. But it kind of comes down to how you test and how you look at things. That is to say, a lot of the different security tests that I see being performed, the customer who is on the requesting side doesn't really know what to ask, really. So what we do is we kind of, everyone kind of, I'm not going to say hide, but, uses the statement, we'll look for critical vulnerabilities. But what the penetration tester finds critical might not be critical for the business and vice versa. So I think we need to look better or need to look more thoroughly at how is this business conducting, their business on the internet? What are the most likely scenarios where even if there's someone, an adversary that is not in the slightest interested in your business, they just want to get into something and install their ransomware or steal your data. So knowing that these things can happen and you have these drive-by attacks, that should hopefully push companies to do a little bit better than compliance. Again, especially cloud, because let's not forget, we've made developers mini administrators on their own little cloud island estates for companies. So we're going to need more transparency there. We're going to need more knowledge as far as how these attacks work and what their limitations are. And of course, with that, hopefully, we'll be able to have the right people and the budget to be able to make that happen, to say, okay, we've done what we needed to do. We're able to detect the most common attacks. What is the next layer of the onion that we can add here to make our security just a little bit better?
Yeah, you touched on an interesting point on cloud, where developers are now an administrator, and obviously not a network administrator and not a security professional at the same time. Do you see that as in its infancy, like the companies need to be more mature in this, making sure that all this knowledge is in those teams? Then is that what's lacking, or doesn't that work?
There is a kind of a rift between how cloud is being used, or how cloud technology is being used. And when I say cloud, I mean software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. In that smaller companies that might not have that many people to look after the cloud estate and to configure it and set it up, versus larger companies who will have the teams, technology, and training, they're almost looking at the same technology. So you have two ships, but one crew is 50 people and the other ship only has a crew of 3. And we're expecting it to work in the same way. Now, for certain things it does. I mean, SaaS services have come a long way in that they will, give you some functionality so that you cannot abuse others. But it is challenging for companies to find out, okay, what is it that we're supposed to focus on? And
I'm guessing you're talking about those situations. Sorry, yeah, I think you're focusing on. You're talking about those technologies that are put by a dev team, like their application in a cloud native, like a Kubernetes cluster, I spin it up in AWS, or an instance like a VM. And they can all do it by themselves instead of going to the IT department and saying, hey, listen, spin up this Linux machine for me, which then comes up hardened and with a firewall rule and all that pre-configured. Now that's no longer the thing. Is that a thing that you see a lot, that is forgotten or poorly done?
The things that you're mentioning, are still being used every day. The problem or the challenge that I see is that knowing that most of the attacks that we're seeing today come through phishing, that means that companies need to really focus on their corporate identity. That is to say, to give you an analogy, I cannot, as a single person, attack the castle. What I can do is try to intercept the people on the way to the castle and say, hey, I'm part of the castle. Give your stuff to me. So knowing that developers are able to launch things that look like it's part of the company, usually pre-production environments, testing environments, staging, where someone in the company on the defensive side is unfortunately a little bit misinformed and saying, it's just test data, you won't be able to get to anything that we care about. Well, it's not that hard to jump over from a pre-production environment to a production environment, usually, especially when it's still being built. So again, knowing that the emphasis is phishing, and knowing that phishing is based on making yourself look like someone else, so identity spoofing or impersonation. If you combine that with the current trend where, as you mentioned, developers are able to spin up things themselves, for me, that shifts the risk towards auditors and people creating security policies should be able to see ahead of this, outline the rules and the Lego blocks that people can play with. And if people want to do more, okay, but then let's talk about it. But unfortunately, as you know, the reality currently is a little bit reverse in that, go fast, go fast and break things. But of course, their security suffers.
Yeah. If you are, you're mentioning that the identity or the identity theft or credential spoofing, whatever, that's most of the time impersonating someone is almost part of every attack. You mentioned ideally a customer tells me, hey, this is the kind of data that I don't want to be stolen, so that's probably something that you should look into. There's nothing wrong, I guess, with explaining to you as a pen tester in this case what you're after. You're educating a little bit what it is, what kind of systems they are. People might argue that a hacker doesn't know these things either. So why should we give you a head start? But I'm guessing it makes your life much more efficient, right? That you do that. Is that fair to
it's
say?
actually a really good question, because I hear that a lot. It's to say, you have to break into this network, you have to break into this building, or do both of them to be able to get onto the network. And you ask for certain information as far as, which service providers do you have, or who do you want? I mean, what attacker role do you want me to play? Is it the person that just, comes off the street and wants to, in a very opportunistic way, try to break into the company? Or do you, for example, want to simulate the fact that one of your service providers, is going to be laid off next week? So they're trying to do something to, gain money or to sell information of something that they saw inside. And a lot of times I get the feedback saying, no, you don't get any information because the attacker doesn't have that either. Unfortunately, that is not
Which is in itself a fair statement, right? It's understandable that you would say that.
To a certain extent, yes. But if I lose my key and I ask the locksmith to break into my house, basically, I'm also not going to tell him that he needs to do it in a really realistic way, like a real burglar, so that when someone passes, he has to jump in the bushes, so to speak. So the attackers have a lot of time and a lot of budget. People tend to forget that attackers have budgets and managers too. That is to say, they have a lot more time to profile you and to see what information that you're leaking, putting that information together.
So what you're saying is, by not being very specific in what where the data is or what they want from you, they're putting you behind like by miles, right? So your time is much more worth if we tell you exactly, hey, this is where the crown jewels are. This is the technology we use. This is the typical hacker we're afraid of. So that's what you would recommend anyone in any red teaming engagement to start with.
I mean, you need to test. My opinion would be you need to test both. In that all the indicators of compromise, as far as someone trying to, for example, guess a password, trying to get into an application. I mean, these are things that you should be testing as part of your purple teaming, which is a combination of red teaming and blue teaming, where you kind of go for all the different things that you absolutely have to see in your the big dashboards or the people in your SOC, Security Operations Center. But then, of course, there's the more novel ways. As we talked about, ways that you might have forgotten, or things that are pretty clear for an outside attacker, but people are working on the inside don't necessarily are able to put that information together. And that's where it gets dangerous. And that, of course, is also the value of these targeted attacks.
Okay. And do you have an example of such a thing?
Well, for example, anything that provides an authentication portal, or anything where someone is able to see, is that email address or person working there? And can I try to guess their password? Even, of course, these things should have two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. But any way where someone is able to authenticate to some part of your organization, and that includes your suppliers, by the way. So that includes your, whatever cloud providers you're using for authentication, session management, backup, storage. You should be able to have detection and response. Let's not forget that part. Detection is not enough, because detection just generates a lot of logs. But also tie it to an action plan that people know what these indicators of compromise mean, as far as what attack are we possibly looking at. And of course, based on that and based on their training, be able to respond with the necessary urgency. It could be just someone who's bored, who is trying, admin, or it could be that someone is systematically trying to guess the password of a single account. And that's where we go into the whole dichotomy of, is this just a opportunistic attacker, or is this a targeted attack?
Do you think that data is everywhere in every organization readily available, but not really actioned upon?
Unfortunately not. And this is an issue that, of course, again, is tied to, do we just want to stick to compliance, or do we want to go beyond that? So the best way of doing it is, of course, is merging the two, is looking at what you need to do for compliance, looking at what attacks are relevant to your systems and your organization, looking at how those attacks might play out, and then seeing if you can add that to your audit and logging policy. But as I keep stressing, it is not enough just to log stuff, right? Logs are, we always joke around that, logs are for the auditors, and unless auditors start hacking your networks, you should probably do something a little bit more. It's also seeing the logs for what they are. So if I try to, for example, let's say you have a webmail solution, or you have some kind of external service where you're allowing people to log in. Could be VPN, could be whatever it is, a website, a supplier website. Someone tries to guess the password for one of these accounts, but you have two-factor authentication on. So even if someone guesses the password, they would not be able to get through unless, of course, they set up a phishing campaign where they relay the credentials. There are ways of bypassing phishing, obviously, depending on how you've set up things. But is anyone in the SOC looking at what user account are people trying to get into? And what is that user account responsible for? And what part of the organization does that include? Because that gives you a lot of the information or intelligence if you put different facts together as far as what are these attackers after. And unfortunately, how things are set up today, a lot of that threat intelligence is being lost because it gets discarded.
Yeah. And maybe also in emails that you get in. I mean, you mentioned the main get in is try to lure people out with indeed a phishing attack or so. I mean, I'm sure that most companies have a policy to drop email that looks suspicious and never look at it.
Absolutely. I mean, again, don't get me wrong. This is in the interest of the end user, right? So if you see if your scanning software or whatever you have for content security sees that whoever's trying to send you a phishing email contains a weird link to something that is a known watering hole server or something malicious, or it contains an attachment, which might contain something fishy, it gets discarded. And the end user, you and me, don't get it in our inbox, which is advantageous because it means less support calls, it means less chance of getting phished, etc. The challenge that we have is that there is no real rating system, or there's no real service that I know of currently that is ubiquitous everywhere, is where it makes a distinction between, is this just a run-off-the-mill generic phishing campaign, or did an attacker put in your brand name, put in your company logo? Did they use maybe host names that you're using internally that might have leaked on the internet? So did someone prepare a very targeted attack? And
this sounds like something that's around to be there, about to be there, because it sounds like a typical use case for an AI-based system, huh?
AI can give you some advantages there as far as doing the triage.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the whole point. I mean, if we have to go into every email that has a malicious link, and you can send them to the SOC and you can make a manual investigation on it, it's impossible, right? But you need some kind of automation to figure it out. And there's many ways of doing automation, and we see that getting better, fortunately, indeed. You're mentioning a lot of things that hackers do and that you do, and which areas. So you get a rough idea of what angle you take from that when you are trying to get in and being the hacker. You probably also have a lot of things that you encounter that ruins your day. I mean, things that and that's very interesting to us all, because that's exactly the kind of things we should do in preventing our data, right? Can you share a couple of items that are really bad for the hacker?
Well, the things that slow me down or that make me think twice about certain attacks will always be the things that have to do with identity and access. Because so you have your what we call the cyber kill chain, which is your typical stages of the attack, which is reconnaissance, enumeration, reconnaissance, finding out who your target is. Are they worth attacking? I mean, do they have something that you want? And that could be either an asset or that could be disruption. Finding a vulnerability or finding a person to abuse their trust, exploiting it, and then you're inside. But that's where it starts. And a lot of the tests that people do only kind of scratch the surface, or someone walks past the reception. Okay, that's fine, but can you actually do any damage? So The thing that would really ruin my day is, for example, seeing that most of the systems have a solution installed where even if I were to phish your password, I wouldn't be able to use it because it uses one-time passwords, for example. So anything that virtualizes, password usage, like password cycling, your CyberArks, your these kinds of things.
It's quite early in the kill chain.
Well, I mean,
midway,
on
maybe.
the assets that actually matter.
Yeah.
If you have almost no way of authenticating to your organization without a TLS certificate, a client certificate, that's going to make things harder.
Yeah.
Because I'm always going to look at where can I log in to either your organization or one of your suppliers where I know for a fact that it's your supplier. And can I find an account where maybe someone is using a bad password, recycled one of their passwords, or where maybe I can phish someone by making them go to my website and then they give their login and password and their one-time password or their token to me, and then I relay it to someone else or to the actual real thing. If I just get an error message that says, sorry, you don't have the right certificate, then I cannot even talk to the service. Now, that's not always possible for most organizations. I mean, we need, customer portals and client portals and, and supplier portals. But
that are not based on a
that,
certificate, but on username password, but they can still employ a multi-factor thing like an SMS or
yes. And if that's done in a dynamic way, like, for example, Microsoft Authenticator, where you have to give one of the three numbers, that really works. And that's really going to ruin my day, at least that day. I'll find different ways. That's going to ruin the day, and it's going to ruin, a lot of the days of different attackers trying to get in that way, because it's the first line of defense.
How good is that? It is MFA, because I mean, I can we've seen many attacks where people indeed mimic, maybe via one of those testing systems that are under the main domain or of the company, so it looks legit. But what if you could lure a user into putting in their OTP code also in a portal? Most MFAs don't really.
100%. That 100% works. So I said, if you don't use, for example, Microsoft Authenticator, where you have to give an actual number as far as which three of the numbers were being shown, if you do not have that particular setup, then unfortunately you're going to be vulnerable to what's called, phishing or credential relaying, or where you set up a web server. You run it as a reverse proxy. That is to say, it looks like the real thing, but it's actually including content from your real, let's say, VPN gateway.
Yeah.
So you, as the victim, log in. You give your login and password. I take the real login, your login and password, and I give it to the real web server. It hopefully sends you a request for a one-time token or an SMS token. Hopefully not SMS. You fill it in. I give it to the real one. I give you a fake error message, and I continue the session, and I get the cookie. I mean, the only thing that I'm really interested in is the cookie.
Yeah.
Because that determines whether or not you've been logged in and that you have a valid session.
And why does the Microsoft Authenticator technique is not vulnerable to that kind of thing then? How do I select a product that does this, except from just Microsoft?
The one that I keep seeing is the Microsoft one, because again, unfortunately, the business world runs on mostly on Microsoft. So you're going to see a lot of your Outlooks and a lot of your OWA services. Now there's other ways of doing it as well. So if you have an authenticator that sends you a challenge, I mean, even game companies have this now, where it says, look, are you logging in with this particular thing, with this particular code? And then unless you actually can be in between, you need to solve the challenge. But if you have a static code, just like a one-time password or one of the good old RSA secure IDs or any kind of one-time password solution, that is just a matter of relaying it.
No longer enough.
Yeah. Or you can use things like, for example, what's called credential or OTP fatigue, where you just I send you constantly send you messages. At a certain point, you want to get rid of the actual messages, so you're going to do what I want you to do. Yeah. So that's going to ruin my day, at least the first day, because then I have to think further, and of course that means going into different attack paths.
And how can we ruin your second day as well?
Ruining my second day would probably be to use the principles of zero trust, which is I've done tests for companies where I need to get into their network and they ask me to do and over the internet and physical, which is the good way of doing it. And I log on or I go to a meeting room and I see that the meeting room has access to a lot of the internal network, which, as we all know, if your company is older than 10 years, there's going to be a lot of stuff on there that's unfortunately just been piled on. The ideal way of doing that, and I've done this as part of, advising customers and then doing the retest, is I walk into the company again and I ask my company contact, look, I'm in again. And the person tells me, sure, try to click it to something. So I connect my laptop to the meeting room network connector and the normal offices and other things. And the only thing I see, which is what you should be seeing, but it's harder for me as an ethical hacker, I only see one port that is available, and that's the VPN port.
Yeah.
Which means now I have to have a valid asset with a valid certificate, with a valid password, with a valid mobile device tied to it. And then I get access to the network in the same way that you would be VPNing in from the internet. And
let me define zero trust here then, because zero trust is, unfortunately, these days means a lot of different things to different people. But what you're talking about is the fact that I have gained one step of access. I'm still nowhere closer to the environment, because every piece of data is protected as if it were directly connected to the internet. So the fact that I'm in a closer trusted zone, or so, zero trust doesn't exist anymore. So that doesn't give me any benefit at all.
Correct.
That's what you experience.
Obviously, your internet line needs to come in somewhere. But I would say with that exception, your physical location inside the company's building should not dictate your privileges on the network.
So that's segmenting your network or doing a NAC-like product.
You could do NAC. It needs to be, of course, tested, because authentication is not encryption. So you can also bypass these things with a network bridge, or sending a rogue and backdoored docking station to a company in a nice brown envelope. That also tends to work. So you want to be able to create zones, and you can use colors, you can use, names, you can use, transformers or Renaissance painters. I don't really care. I've seen it all. But you need to be able to define the zones and then to say, okay, who needs access to this zone? And if someone wants to get access to this particular asset, either internally, employee or supplier, what do we define the security policy to be? And what is the value of the information and the access you could obtain? And then you work your way backwards.
Clear. In a minute, I'm going to ask you about something that everybody asks me all the time. It's about what's the influence of AI to all this, both on the attacker and the victim side. But before we do that, let me get to a treasure hunt. As you're used to, we have treasure hunt for you. And if you send the code that I'm about to tell you to code@threat-talks.com, you get one of those nice Threat Talks t-shirts shipped to you. The code is 173862. So be sure to mail it in and you can enjoy that t-shirt. Like I said, Tom, AI is everywhere. It's also becoming a little of a buzzword, of course. So we always always feel the need to clarify what we mean by it. So let's do that a little bit for our area. So for cybersecurity, and maybe first from the attacker's perspective, because you see a lot of people saying, "Hey, listen, maybe the start of the kill chain is the thing that is." That is going to change for whatever reason. What's your take on this? What do you see? How would AI help an attacker?
Well, you already mentioned it. Like any new emerging technology, people are going to misunderstand what it is and what its implications can be. And as the business world and us as individuals also learn how to use it, we will see more AI being used. The thing is that with any technology, or any kind of deep knowledge, there's only so much that you and I can just understand. I also don't know deep down how biology works or what makes me sick. I've been given a few recommendations, which is don't run outside without a coat. Make sure you get your vitamins and you eat well and exercise well, and then you have less chance of getting sick. We all understand that. But when it comes to AI, I mean, we call everything that is computer generated or that mimics human behavior, we call that AI. So for me, AI gives a lot of advantages in that it can be used for those three first phases in the what we call the kill chain. So the phases of a cyber attack, which is who would be the most profitable to attack. Who do I actually profile? Who has access to the payroll? Who has access to inside information on whether or not company A will acquire company B? So it's also very hard to visualize that or to create clickbaity titles or articles for that, because currently the perception of AI for most people is it can generate text, it can create funny pictures, and it's being used for chatbots and disinformation. Yeah. But that is not exactly, I mean, attackers are obviously also capitalizing on that.
Yeah, well, you can make better spams, right? You can make better phishing attempts that look more like more real life and without all the spelling errors that we're so used to.
Yeah.
But you're saying it's much more beyond that.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, as you know, attackers had no problems sending phishing emails that worked before the coming of AI and LLMs. But now with the rise of LLMs or AI in general, it has become easier. But in that sense, you know, nothing should really change on the defender side when it comes to the threat model.
But that's everybody's talking about this. This is the thing.
I know, but the thing is that, I mean, what we're now talking about is a very good example on the asymmetry that we have between attacks and defense. In that I can use LLM. If I have a bunch of emails from you, or I know your writing style, then I can give that to a generative AI engine, and I can produce an email that is going to look like you wrote it. Even, you know, your little mannerisms in it or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter how much AI you have on the other side. If that's the only thing you're looking at, then unfortunately an AI is not going to be able to do that triage and say, this was probably computer generated. It can do that up to a certain level, but after that, you're going to be swimming in false positives. Yeah. I mean, take your spell checker. Most people, you know, don't really use spell checkers because it works for 99%, and then we all spend the rest of our afternoon trying to add abbreviations that we're only going to use once in our lives from a document, right? So do these things work? Yes and no. So AI will fill in the gaps for certain things. It will help cyber attackers profile more easily. And then they will say, okay, now let's generate a deep fake of that person because we figured out that person has access to the things that we care about. But as mentioned, it's very hard to give that to the large audience to say, look, this is what AI is being used for. Also for the simple fact that there's nothing really to do about it.
I can also imagine that there are more creative ways in applying, as an attacker, in applying AI. I mean, because you mentioned figuring out who is the CFO or of a company, or who is the person who is in charge of paying stuff, or you can also look that up on LinkedIn as a natural person, right?
Correct. Yes. So when it comes to people, I mean, you have things like LinkedIn that you can scrape. And LinkedIn is trying to prevent those things, but you know, but for example, this is a very nice example of what we call assumed breach. So when you attack a company, when you're doing red teaming, I could spend 2 months going through LinkedIn and trying to document every single employee that has a LinkedIn account and what they do and what their function name is. But let's be very honest, you don't want to pay me for 2 months just to be sitting on LinkedIn. Dear customer, how about you give me that list? And we both consider this compromised. We consider that an attacker has spent the money. How would that attack now play out if they have the full list of employees? And you kind of go on from there.
But how does AI work? Help the actual hacker in this?
It would, because, for example, again, attackers have budgets and managers too. So if I only have the budget on the attacker side for 1 or 2 phishing campaigns, and I really want to monetize my actions, then I need to find companies that have ways where I can either, you know, funnel the money out, or maybe steal something that I can later monetize and turn into cash, or, you know, Monero, Bitcoin, what have you. So what you do is you ask an LLM or you ask a ChatGPT like chatbot, you ask it, look, give me the list of the biggest companies that would have these kinds of things that I'm interested in that I can turn into money or turn into funds. Tell me what their major suppliers are when it comes to IT, cloud, and tell me where those actually reside on the internet. I know from an attacker standpoint, from a real criminal standpoint, not on the ethical hacker side, but the criminals. Now they know which companies to hit, so that if they are able to get into those companies, they'll have a maximum spread or a maximum list of companies as a potential that they can get in and actually gain the money back for their attack. And there, of course, AI is a dream come true for those kinds of criminals.
Yeah, because if I hear correctly, instead of selecting a company and then trying to figure out a plan to get in, you're selecting the company based on how you know you can get in or what you're after, and it will select the company for you.
Correct. So we're talking about something where maybe we have a category somewhere in between opportunistic attacks, like the script kiddies do. So as you know, script kiddies are people who take one attack tool, they scan the entire internet, they accidentally get in and then write a 5-page manifesto on how they've always hated Argentinian kindergarten websites. And then we have the target attackers, where most companies will say that the attackers are not interested in them. But now we kind of have a subcategory in between the two, which is attackers that are able to very quickly and very easily and, again, very cheaply are able to target based on what it is that you are protecting. And again, to add to that, I understand the standpoint that companies say, look, I don't have anything of value because, there's much bigger fish to fry. But your connections and your trust relationships that you have to your employees, your customers, and your suppliers, that is the actual prize. Because attackers see this, and attackers, just like back in the 90s when gaining access to the phone network was the hack, just being able to have access to a network of trusted individuals and systems, that is of great value to a cyber attacker.
You mentioned one of my favorite fallacies, there's nothing I have to lose, or there's nothing of value in me. But what you're explaining here is you now have, because the script kiddies who you don't care about because you have no value, certainly that same techniques or the same ease of techniques that script kiddies can use now actually do harm you because you get selected as a target in a way that you weren't aware of. The AI did it for the hacker.
And let's also not forget that, of course, times have changed, but for the last 10, 15 years, we now have a new paradigm that, I explain to companies when I go there and give presentations and coaching sessions, which is the concept of cybercrime as a service. Cyber criminals don't really care if what you have is of value. They let someone else decide that. Because in all the different layers of cybercrime as a service, there are these people called initial access brokers. And their job, from 9 to 5 times a day, is just to gain access to things. And then they sell off that access to the next layer, which is just people that will look around and to see, okay, is there anything monetizable here? And they sell it off to the third person or group of people that will try and do the actual attacks and of course take the risk of getting detected and arrested. But there's this whole layered business model, really, this whole ecosystem. So when people say I have nothing of value, the fact that someone would just be able to get inside a door that is a little bit open or climb through a window, that alone is monetizable, and that has a market value, of course.
Yeah, and that's inside of every company. So everybody then has something to hide, to protect.
Everyone is sitting on some kind of value. If you work for a vacuum cleaner company, and you have access to their internal ticketing system, and you can see all the customers, or you can see what products will come, that 100% is more access and privilege than me that, is a consumer or works in the industry. Yep. So everyone has some extra privileges in the workplace or in the place where they work and operate that could be of value to someone else.
There's one last thing I wanted to discuss with you. That is the role of the CISO, because you are constantly talking to organizations. CISOs are a big part of them. And for example, do you think that a CISO needs to be a technical person? Does that work better?
I think that CISOs, in my personal opinion, need to have a certain degree of technical knowledge to be able to place attacks that have, are that we always will have, that are kind of a part of the technology that we use on an everyday basis. But also if new attacks come out, that they're also able to, at least to a certain extent, are able to place that or do the rough triage. Now, obviously, CISOs need to surround themselves with teams that are specialized in compliance, in the more technical side, architecture, the real technical teams, but also the teams that deal with, things like compliance. But I still think that CISOs need to be able to at least have a certain base level of technical knowledge to be able to understand these kinds of things. For the simple reason that, as well as I do, that technology is only getting more complex. It gets more and more dependencies for the simple fact that, certain people are very good at certain things. So what you want to do is you want to combine all of those things into one particular product or service that you and I can use to advance our business. But that doesn't really help security because you have more people around the table. There's more stakeholders, there's more risk, and thus there's more requirements. There's more service level agreements. There's a lot more to think about. And if you have then someone that maybe only comes from the deep technical side, or a CISO that comes from the very deep legal and compliance side, both extremes are not going to be advantageous. So in my point of view, and from the work that I've been doing, explaining these things to CISOs, you probably want a profile that is someone hanging in between, that can talk along with these kinds of discussions. But at the same time, if there are certain things that go beyond their knowledge, which again, it's a very complex world out there, it's fine, that they have a team to rely on to be able to, inform each other on what something is and isn't.
What is things that a CISO has to do in your opinion? What should be on his list of things that is good to? In your profession, you're trying to get in, of course, and so you're really looking at the outcome of not being breachable, so not being compliant. You're more what works really well.
I think first and foremost, you need to have a very realistic view on things. So not be I would say, rock to sleep with things like we're not a target or, we've never been attacked, so we must be doing something right. But someone that looks at the infrastructure for what it is, the company for what it is, and the risks and threats that might be out there and how they might play out for your business. And that sounds pretty straightforward, but it really isn't. Because a lot of companies will look at things in a certain way by, focusing or over-focusing on certain things, but then not focusing on others. So I think first and foremost, a CISO should be very on top of what exposure management means for their organization. That goes from, having a very good asset management system, so you know what to defend, but also, any kind of exposure. That means brand abuse. That means background checks for employees. That means setting up requirements for suppliers that if tomorrow they have a breach or, they don't exist anymore next week, do we have a plan for that? So exposure management, and as part of that, attack surface management, as we call it, are crucial in being able to stay afloat and conducting business on the internet. There's no two ways about it.
I hear also say a little bit like a view that is beyond, not internally faced, not just looking at yourself from the outside, but it's a combination of all the things. Like it's a very versatile assignment as a CISO then that you need to fulfill.
It's also realizing that you are not on top of everything. Like when I go to companies that, a lot of companies or large companies have internal penetration testing teams. There's now a trend where we simply do not have enough people in the security industry, unfortunately. So companies are using, for example, internal red teaming teams, and that works when you are a certain size. But the problem is that once you start focusing too much on your internal testing efforts, you are going to lose the outside view, which is someone or something or a team, which is the original thought behind a red team, which is someone that is not locked into your organization and is able to think and do freely, is to be able to also spot these things. I'm pretty sure that you've shared an elevator with someone with way too much perfume on, right? That's because they really love that perfume, but they don't smell it anymore. Their tolerance level went up to a certain level where you and I have to stand in the elevator with this person and smell the extra perfume. In the same way, companies become, in my experience, numb. They become a little bit desensitized for some of the things that might be going on internally, which they think is normal because, hey, things were like this when I joined and things will probably be like this when I leave. But, and I have this in every single presentation that I do, which is attackers don't care about your structure. So any kind of hack that I do, any kind of intrusion, any kind of incident response that I do, usually from management, the reaction is always the same, which is the attackers didn't follow the rules we invented. Attackers don't care about the structure.
They didn't feel themselves tied to our change management process. Huh?
Exactly. It's like most hackers that compromise something that say, "Oh, I apologize. I didn't know this was unhackable." So it all depends. I mean, there's plenty of examples in the world, right? Why did the Titanic have not enough lifeboats? Because someone in the design phase says, this ship is unsinkable. And if you start doing business like that, if you start doing your business and acting like that, then all of a sudden you're going to be up for a surprise where someone is going to come along, test stuff, is going to find things that, should have been handled. And then we're back to, square one where someone, maybe doesn't want to read the report or gives you interesting reactions like throwing the report at you.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I was, last thing I wanted to touch on a little bit. The emotion there, or maybe taking the blame, or who's the person whose fault this all is. What's in your opinion the best role a CISO can play to make this let's say a blame culture or the absence of it that drives towards more resilience in an organization? Do you have some pointers for CISO on that?
I think the best example of that was, I think it was 2 years ago, where I saw a post by, I think the head of the cyber division of the FBI, I think, that made an online social media post that said, look at the level of phishing emails that I receive. I would most definitely have clicked on some of these things.
Yeah.
So no one is above, we're all human beings. That means how we use technology is going to be predictable. And that's exactly what an attacker wants. And no matter if you're interacting with an LLM and you're asking it for a software library that doesn't exist, and then some attacker will create the website for you to make sure that it does exist, and you all of a sudden come to their rogue environment. It doesn't really matter. So companies that have a security culture that emphasizes the fact that it's okay to report a security problem, that you yourself are not going to be blamed. I mean, that is a really, really good starting point.
Honestly, I think this is crucial.
Exactly. Security is not singular. There is being secure and there's feeling secure. And people tend to combine these two things into one thing. We buy security products because we want to be safe from hackers, attacks, and incidents. We want to buy peace of mind. But you know as well as I do that, I mean, if you go and look on a real estate website, you can buy houses, but you can't buy homes. A home is something that you fill in yourself. It is the combination of all those things. So in the same way, we need to make sure that we create a culture where, things are okay to, it's okay to talk about, shortcomings. And of course, also, how do we fix these? It's okay to talk about the fact that we can't do it all. And that's also, quote unquote, fine. But then what do we do? And it's okay to actually, be a human being and say, look, maybe that's too much access, or I cannot really work like that. Because just turning things off, as you already mentioned, when it comes to zero trust, is not enough. We need to replace. It's easy to turn off file attachments for emails over 20 megabytes, right? What is the immediate reaction? Well, people need to share big files. So now you're going to have all your data going through a cloud service that you and I don't know about outside of our control. So as a CISO, you need to be able to look at these things for what they are. You need to be the start of the security culture within your company. And you need to detach yourself from the emotional side, is that, if the building catches fire, that's no one's fault, unless, of course, you were the one dousing gasoline on it. We need to, actually handle this as an organization, as a group of people. Because when I get interviewed with saying, look, Tom, what would you attack in our company? Can you maybe get into the CEO's mailbox? Unfortunately, attackers are not that interested in that. Mm-hmm. Do you know who I want to talk to? The person that's sitting in the corner of the room, who is the payroll specialist, because that person has access to the payroll. I want to see what that person has access to, and if I can get to his or her account, because that's where the actual money is. So we look at things emotionally, which is fine. Again, we're human beings, but we need to learn to detach ourselves from the fact that we shouldn't have this, emotional response. No one wants to be proven that, maybe you haven't done your work correctly. Everyone does what they're trying, everyone tries to get out of bed and do the right thing. No one comes out of bed and says, today I'm going to really ruin the cybersecurity of this company. But it also means talking to your people and making sure that you're not seen as the naysayers and the internal police, but rather the people that serve as security and or business enablers.
And enabling that culture is something that you easily forget, maybe. So it's good to have a good emphasis on this if you are the CISO.
Not only that, it's also, it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle. Making people brute force a multiple choice security awareness quiz once a year is not going to give you extra security. But creating a security culture where, we talk about, maybe a breach or an incident has happened. Well, maybe now you should do a presentation for the company or explain, look, this came because we had this. Obviously, this has happened, and we've made these changes to make sure that it doesn't happen again. That is really, what they call, in English, eating your own dog food. Mm-hmm. It means not getting used to the taste of dog food and starting a dog food recipe website. It means doing better. And of course, taking your own medicine.
And drink your own champagne in the end.
Exactly. Hopefully. Yeah. But also, on top of that, as the last point, security is a really weird thing. It's a little bit like fire insurance. Are you telling me I have to pay a lot of money for things to stay the same? Well, things that stay the same are boring, right? How do we reduce the cost of this? Do we really need this? And that's really, I started my career as a Linux system administrator. That means if I did my job correctly and nothing bad happened, people ask me, why do we pay you again? What are you doing here? Everything works. And if something all of a sudden breaks, then I get the same knock on the door saying, hey, this thing broke. What do we pay for you? What do we pay for you again? So it can be a very thankless job to work in cybersecurity. But if you keep your principles straight, if you try to do the right thing, a lot of wonderful things can come out of it. But unfortunately, sometimes there is some bitter medicine that has to be taken before we can start working on those things like security culture.
Okay, Tom, thank you very much. That's our inspiring things to think about. We have some homework, all of us, I think. Thank you very much for being in this Threat Talk today. And to our viewers, thank you very much for tuning in. And if you liked what you saw today, please press the like button, because it helps us spread the word further so everybody else can also benefit from this. And there's also the subscribe button. If you click that one, you'll be sure that the next week on Tuesday, again, you have our next episode. We'd love to hear your feedback. Email us at team@threat-talks.com. And here from the Security Operations Center floor at Ontoit, I say goodbye to you and thank you very much. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Threat Talks, a podcast by Ontoit Cybersecurity and AMS-IX. Did you like what you heard? Do you want to learn more? Follow Threat Talks to stay up to date on the topic of cybersecurity.